Good morning, everyone. On today's episode, I'm sharing an interview I gave on the Reading Revisited podcast. The ladies of that show invited me onto the podcast to introduce to their listeners the entire Ransom Trilogy. It seemed like an impossible task, and honestly, it really was. I think we barely scratched the surface of it. But it was a fun discussion, and also on that show, they asked their guests about their top 5 books. So we spent some time talking about non-Lewisian literature. And since on this podcast, we focus primarily on the Inklings, I thought that might make a nice little break. Also, on a recent episode of the Wade Center podcast, the hosts spoke about their favorite books. So I thought this might be a nice complement to that. So I hope you enjoy, and we'll see you next week back on Perelandra.
Welcome to Reading Revisited, a place for friends to enjoy some good, old-fashioned book chat while revisiting the truth, goodness, and beauty we found in our favorite books. I'm Kelsey Hartley.
I'm Hannah Swear.
And I'm Jessica Risma.
And we are here today with David Bates from Pints with Jack to chat about C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy. How are you doing?
I'm great. How are you guys doing?
Doing well today. How are you, David?
I'm doing great. I have poured myself a beer, and I'm ready to talk about C.S. Lewis. This is my happy place right here.
I do feel a little bad that you're drinking alone here.
Yes.
I mean, I have a Diet Pepsi, so cheers.
Cheers.
Love it.
Might need to go find that whiskey in a little bit.
Yeah.
I was saying before we started recording that my husband works at a distillery, and this would have been the perfect time to shout
Perfect.
out Beehawk. So anyway, if anybody lives in the General Sandhills area, Brad Halling American Whiskey Company, it's really great. And yeah, they're really great. But I'm not drinking them right now because we have like a pour left in the cabinet, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed to drink it. I mean, I'm sure I am, but oh, well, thanks for coming on, David. Before we get started with talking about Lewis, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure thing. As you can tell from the lovely way that I pronounce words, I'm English. I moved to the United States in 2008, so I've actually been here quite a while now. I have a wife. I proposed to her in February of 2020. And for those of you that remember that time, you know that was just before the world shut down. So we got married during COVID. I planned our wedding about 6 or 7 times because Gavin Newsom kept changing the rules.
Yes.
The nice thing about getting married during COVID is that people still send you presents, but they don't actually have to come to the party. So it actually worked out rather well for us. In fact, ever since, I always encourage couples who have just got engaged. It's like, seriously, it doesn't need to be complicated.
True.
I agree.
But yeah, so we got married during COVID, and then I drove her from San Diego in California to La Crosse, Wisconsin, where we now live, also during COVID. And about a week and a half later, my son Alexander was born. And since then, we also have my daughter Lucy. A surprising name for somebody that really likes C.S. Lewis, I'm sure. But for my day job, I'm a software engineer. I lead a team of developers out of Chicago, and I'm one of the hosts of Pints with Jack, which is a C.S. Lewis podcast where we interview enthusiasts and scholars and work through his books, typically a chapter at a time.
David, you are the second male guest we've had on this podcast. And the first one was also an engineer, which is just a unique, why does this literature podcast only bring on engineers if they're guys? I don't know.
You are our first Brit, though. So
Yeah,
that
That's
is
true.
that
Yeah,
is
we
a
can give you
high
that,
honor.
Laurel.
I will find somewhere to plant a flag.
That's awesome. Well, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you were introduced to Lewis? And you shouted out Pints with Jack a little bit, but I'd love to hear how your interest in Lewis developed into that project.
Yeah, well, I grew up hearing my mother read the Chronicles of Narnia to my older sister. And so I was a huge Narnian fan for as long as I can remember. I had a toy lion called Aslan. We went to Oxford to see several stage adaptations of the books. And I was, because I'm so old, I was actually watching the BBC adaptations, the ones with like the 6-foot beavers. I was watching those on TV as they were coming out. Actually, even I actually found the tickets that I made for my friends. I actually had a watch party before watch parties were a thing.
Oh, that's adorable.
It's very cute.
So I was hugely into Narnia as a kid. Then I think the last time I read any of the books I was about 10 or 11. But I rediscovered Narnia again in my 20s. I was babysitting for a family for church. I was a single guy and I was the youngest child in the family, so I had no idea what to do with children. So I bribed them with reading the Chronicles of Narnia. And so as I was reading it to them, I fell in love with it all over again. I always had very warm feelings for Narnia, but coming back to it as an adult and seeing all of the extra layers and the things that he was doing, I fell in love with it again. I bought the series again, read them, I think, in about a week or two. And I was now, my faith had come alive. So I was part of a faith community where when people saw me with the Chronicles of Narnia book tucked into my bag, they said, "Oh, have you read any of his other stuff?" And so that's when I found out that he wrote far more than just the Chronicles of Narnia, about 30 or 40 books, depending on how you chop them up. And so I started chipping away at his apologetics and his fantasy. And I would read a book or two every year or two. And I always told myself that at some point I want to get into a book club where I can discuss Lewis more, because I always feel like I'm enjoying it, but there's much more going on here than I'm really understanding. And so fast forwarding to about 2017, I was living in San Diego and I was at a party and I met a guy called Matt Bush. And as I want to do at parties, I was talking about C.S. Lewis. And he and I had a moment that Lewis describes in The Four Loves as, "What, you two? I thought I was the only one."
Yes.
So he loved Lewis as well. And so we agreed that we were going to meet up for a coffee and start working our way through Mere Christianity together. I posted about it on Facebook. Suddenly we had a book group. And so we had typically about 10 people turn up once a month to work our way through the books that we were discussing. And that was a lot of fun, but it still kind of felt a little rushed. So I suggested to Matt, why don't we do one of those podcast things? And so we can just do it chapter by chapter and, really get down to brass tacks. And we didn't have plans to go beyond that, but it kind of got out of hand and, we're now on season 8. So we started the podcast. We initially named it The Eagle and Child, which was the pub where C.S. Lewis met with the Inklings, his literary friends, where they would talk about, well, typically in the pub, they would talk about church politics. But then on Thursday nights, they would meet in his rooms for strong tea, pipes, and they would read each other's manuscripts. And so we initially named the podcast The Eagle and Child because we wanted the idea that you were just joining us as we were joining Lewis and his friends around a pint, discussing literature. But then when we bought a domain, we were forced to change the name, and so we renamed ourselves to Pints with Jack. So Pints is hopefully obvious, and Jack is Lewis's nickname that he had ever since he was a young child, and that was what his friends called him. And Jack and I have spent enough time together that I regard him as a close friend, so that's what we call him. And then in 2020, Andrew joined. Andrew was, at the time, he was a layman, but he was just starting ordination in the Episcopal Church. And we had him on as a special guest for Till We Have Faces, which is his favorite book. Oh, my goodness. If you ever want anyone to wax poetic about it, he's your man. But he came on a couple of times that season because we felt kind of out of our depth and like we needed some help. So we interviewed him a couple of times, and then at the end he said, "Can I come on more regularly?" And so he joined the team, and since then we've gone through Mere Christianity, The Great Divorce, Till We Have Faces, The Screwtape Letters, The Four Loves, Out of the Silent Planet, which we'll talk about in a little bit, various letter collections, because Lewis wrote every day, so it's an obscene amount of stuff. So we just did his Latin letters, which he wrote to a guy who was later canonized in the Catholic Church, and they were writing to each other in Latin, as you do.
Oh,
Wow.
Letters to an American Lady, which this nicely coincided with Lucy's birth. So there's pictures of me at that Christmas with Lucy on my chest, me reading her Letters to an American Lady. and also his letters to children, which are just adorable.
Mm.
And at the moment, we are in another one of the trilogy. We are currently going through Perelandra.
Awesome.
That's awesome.
Perfect.
I just picked up Letters to an American Lady last week, and I love it. It's just such a unique, seeing the letters. Yeah, I'm as always with C.S. Lewis, but I'm gonna have to sit with it for a while.
Those ones are kind of underrated, I feel like.
Yeah, it was actually the first book, Andrew, my co-host, that he read of Lewis. And
Oh, wow.
it is a very particular kind of Lewis. People talk about there are different Lewises. There's Lewis, the literary
Yeah.
critic, Lewis, the apologist. Here you have Lewis, the pastor. All of his
Mm-hmm.
advice in his letters is wonderful. Actually, my niece, Rachel, she is about to be confirmed. Well, actually, probably about the time that this podcast goes out, so she's going to be confirmed. And I was trying to think what to do about it, and there's a letter from C.S. Lewis to his goddaughter on the eve of her confirmation, and I'm literally just going to type it out because there is no better advice. Where he basically says this is something wonderful. God may give you special feelings along with this, but whether he does or whether he doesn't, what's important is the grace that's there. And he also mentions that as her godfather, he's included a little bit of poor magic along with the letter, i.e. some money. And since I'm also my niece's godfather, I will be doing the same.
Oh.
Oh, that's sweet. My oldest daughter's godfather, got her a copy of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe because it's inscribed to Lucy, his goddaughter, and then he wrote a note that like very well mirrors the note that Lewis wrote. It's very sweet. It's a prized possession that I think now she's 9. I think she like just can appreciate it now. She had no idea how cool it was, obviously. But-
she's nearly old enough to start reading fairy tales again.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And she
exactly.
she read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe on her own. We've been working through the whole series probably since she was like 3, and we always like make it a little further each time because I am not good at reading aloud apparently. And now we're finally to The Magician's Nephew. So we're like, I think we're gonna finish it this time, but she's gone back and is reading them on her own, just for fun. And then it ended up being on her school list this year. So she ended up having to like replace The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe with Prince Caspian because she's like, I just read that one. I was like, you can read the next one, that's fine. And she loves it. It's great.
And reading them in publication order as well. I approve.
Yes. Yeah.
That's Kelsey's thing.
Strong feelings.
I was going to say before we leave Narnia, that I love, David, that you mentioned that was your entrance into Lewis. We talk a lot about the true, the good, and the beautiful, as all people do right now. And it reminds me that Bishop Barron once said that people are often trying to start with the true. You've probably heard this analogy of his, and he says, but that's like trying to convince someone to play baseball by first teaching them the rules of baseball, which are tedious, a ton, and very boring. But he said people fall in love with baseball by watching a pop fly. And so similarly, people's entrance into the true should often begin with the beautiful and then go to the good and then end in the true. So it's just beautiful that Lewis made the world of Narnia, but then also the space trilogy, things that I think his editors were a little confused by, right? Like, why would you write these imaginative works at the height of your career?
Well,
At least with Narnia.
Yeah, I mean, him writing children's stories was met with roars of laughter when he announced it at the breakfast table one morning because he was still then unmarried and had no real exposure to children. But it's one of Lewis's things. He wants to re-enchant our imaginations, and he expands on this in the Screwtape Letters. But he speaks about how these things interact between the will, the intellect, and the imagination. And it's one of the things that he does consistently in his works is to try and give us another avenue in. And some people are different. Some people just give me some straight syllogisms and we'll work from there. Other people do need their imaginations enchanted, and Lewis does both. And very often he will be tackling the same ideas in different genres and in different ways.
Yes.
So he covers the 4 loves in Till We Have Faces. One is a more didactic version of the material, and the other is a story where all of these things are incarnated and embodied.
We just finished, not real time, not podcast time. We just finished a Wendellberry book.
Uh-huh.
And so we talked about how Port William, it builds on itself. You keep getting these different views into this one town. And you made me think how Lewis is almost a town in and to himself. Because yes, his works speak to each other almost as if they were from different people, different
Like
people.
it's you recognize
Mm.
that
Yes.
it's Lewis, but it's totally different avenues. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Is
do
that-
tell people when they're reading Lewis for the first time, like especially the nonfiction, and don't know what to do with it. I'm like, honestly, just keep pressing through and then pick up another one in a little bit and then
Mm.
maybe go back to it later. Like he does inform himself and you get used to the way he writes. It's so not quite, not when I say bad, I don't mean bad, but not as like bad as Chesterton, where it's just like so circular. But it is a little more circular sometimes than I think we are used to with like the very linear reasoning that a lot of like modern nonfiction would write with.
Mm.
And I do think it helps to just read more of him. But then again, yeah, the fiction to the nonfiction and the letters. And I would actually love you to expand a little bit the idea that there are like multiple Lewises.
Yeah.
David, did you say that earlier?
Yeah, yeah. Well, he wrote in every genre, and you mentioned before that you wanted me to give my elevator pitch for Lewis.
Yes.
And
Yeah, go for it.
it is the fact that he's a fantastic writer and communicator. He is very funny. He's also very charitable most of the time when he's dealing with his enemies. But one of his greatest strengths is that whatever genre someone likes, Lewis has written a book in it. He's written apologetics, fairy tales, science fiction, essays, autobiography, anthologies, and that was what he did on the side. And then he's got his main work as in literary criticism, and still those books are issued today for students to read. So this is why you have all of these different Lewises, because he wrote in each of those different genres, and he very much liked the ideas. When he'd often say that he wrote in pictures, and when he's looking at the picture, that would help determine what genre he was writing in. Which is why when he had this idea of a faun walking through a snowy wood with an umbrella, it's like clearly fairy tale. When he sees floating islands, it's like, okay, this seems like fantasy. And so he was just incredibly versatile as a writer, such that, kind of like there's the conspiracy theory that Shakespeare didn't really write Shakespeare. And it's like, how can one person write so much stuff? Yeah,
Boo.
it's pretty much unless if the records of Lewis were wiped out for his background, I'm sure people in a couple of centuries would go, "There's no way that this one person wrote all of these things."
Yes.
And it was like or in biblical criticism, where it's just like this letter and this book are written meant to be by the same person, but they seem very different. Well, if they're in a different literary genre, that shouldn't be surprising. And I think people would say the same thing of Lewis.
That's that's fantastic. I love
Yeah.
that.
There
Also,
would be
we
a
will
hidden
have
Q
just
source of
read.
Lewis that he was drawing from.
Yeah. We will have just read Othello when this comes out too. So also great connection. That's great. Okay. Well, yeah, I feel like you just gave us the elevator pitch. So I feel like we can jump into Space Trilogy unless you have more.
One other thing in my elevator pitch is Christian writers typically fall at least roughly down denominational lines. Lewis is the exception to that.
Yes.
Everybody loves him. Baptist, Catholic, Orthodox, Presbyterian, it doesn't matter. And just the very fact that you have different groups that very often don't see eye to eye, but still laud this one person, just tells you that there's something special there.
Everybody's always trying to claim Lewis. Everybody's like, actually, he really agreed with me. Let me tell you why.
Exactly.
He was basically my denominator. That's great. Well, yeah, so we're going to read the Space Trilogy, starting with Out of the Silent Planet and Perlandra in February, and then we'll move into That Hideous Strength in March. So could you kind of introduce us to all of them, one of them?
I told my wife what you wanted me to do, and she went, "What? All of them?"
Oh, yeah, no, it's a lot.
Oh. Okay, well, probably a little bit of background would be good. First of all, these books started with a conversation between C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, the guy that wrote The Lord of the Rings. And Lewis said, "Tollers, there aren't enough books that are the sort of thing that we like. We should probably go write them." And there was a coin toss, and it was settled that Lewis would write a space story, and Tolkien would write a time travel story. And so it began with Lewis publishing Out of the Silent Planet in 1938. And it began with Tolkien, if you know anything about Tolkien, lots of procrastinating. So he started The Lost Road, and The Lost Road, it just never got down the street. So that was what started it. Lewis wanted to write books that he didn't feel there was enough of, and ones which he liked. And he was a huge pulpy science fiction fan. When people think of C.S. Lewis, they think of all of his scholarly work and Christian apologetics. He also really liked the pulpy. Back then, it was called scientific fiction. The scientific fiction magazines with short stories, and you see a lot of those influences in his books once you've actually read the original. It's like, oh, this sounds kind of familiar. But Lewis first of all produced Out of the Silent Planet, and then a few years later, Perelandra, and then after that, That Hideous Strength. In terms of as a whole, it is a little strange because it shifts genre. It doesn't stay exactly where it began. So, you know, if you've read, say, H.G. Wells or David Lindsay, so H.G. Wells wrote The First Men on the Moon, and David Lindsay, he had The Voyage to Arcturus. If you read those and you then read Out of the Silent Planet, you go, oh, he's aping this. It's really similar, but then with a twist, and it's the twist where Lewis does really well. And that's a very medieval model, that you don't just invent stories from whole cloth. You take what's originally there and you go, I don't like this bit, and this bit. I'm going to change them. What if? And then they see that work out. And so that's what he does in Out of the Silent Planet. But by the time we get to Perelandra, it's more akin to fantasy. Now, the distinction between science fiction and fantasy, people will argue about forever. I would say, is it basically about machines, or is it about magic and the supernatural? And so that's why I would say that there's a transition between those first two books. Because in the first book, he travels to another planet in a spaceship. In the second book, he is taken by a supernatural being in a coffin. So I would say there's a definite shift between the first and second books. And then we come to the third book, which is That Hideous Strength. And I've heard it described many things. Bonkers, nutso, crazy. It is a very different sort of book. And it crosses a whole load of different genres. It's dystopian fiction. It's science fiction. It's supernatural. It's fantasy. It's theological. It's philosophical. It's a very weird book. And if any of you guys have read Charles Williams, this is often described as a Charles Williams book by C.S. Lewis. It's of a very similar sort of vein, and his books are actually bonkers. But That Hideous Strength is crazy, but it's also really, really fun. And I'd say actually out of most people I speak to, if I ask them to pick a favorite, they usually choose That Hideous Strength.
Yeah, I concur.
But in terms of content and sort of some overarching themes, or at least motifs that appear very often, a big one is a question of formation and perception. There's a line in The Magician's Nephew where we're told that what you see and hear very much depends on where you're standing and what sort of person you are.
Yes.
And we see that throughout the book, and particularly the first two books, when we're often given things from Ransom's point of view as he is just trying to understand what he's seeing and experiencing. And very often what he's experiencing, he's having to then try and make sense of it sort of after the fact. There's a line in the first book that says, you can't really tell what something is, what you're looking at, until you actually know what it is. And so that idea of increased perception and the baggage and the background we bring to things very much shapes how we view things. So I'm really going to try and stay spoiler free in all this, but the bad guys of the first one, they bring a lot of very nasty baggage with them, and how they view other people in general, humans in particular, and aliens especially. And that shapes everything about how they perceive what happens in that book. And it's only Ransom who is a better man. He's still a flawed man, but he's a better man. It's only when he goes and actually experiences things as as unencumbered as he can, that he starts getting to the truth about the planet and understanding his place on this planet and in this larger story that we soon find that they're part of. And when we're talking about Ransom, you could view these books as kind of an Arthurian romance. And so I don't mean necessarily, like a bodice ripper or, smoochy stuff. None of that. But the romance in its more classical sense. It's a knight errant, a knight on horseback who's on a quest. And the point of all of those stories is, one, to have, a rip-roaring adventure, and that's fun. But then to see the change in our protagonist as he goes through each of these quests and each of these challenges, and see how they each prepare him for the challenge that's going to come afterwards. And so really that's the thing that holds this whole series together. It's Ransom himself. And you will find purists that will say this is not a space trilogy, this is the Ransom trilogy, because he is the common element to it. And his progression from where he begins to where he ends is really significant. Oh my goodness, I don't know what else to say. There's so many other things to say. Good and evil, and the nature of humanity, what life on other planets would mean for Christianity and faith in general. And Lewis dealt with this in essays called like Religion and Rocketry and The Seeing Eye. But once again, Lewis tackles the same subject in multiple ways. And here he's giving us the working out of what life on other planets would mean in terms of the fall, salvation, the role of the incarnation, and Jesus on the cross. And I think the other thing that I'd have to mention, particularly for the last one, is about knowledge and power. You see it early on in the bad guys, what they value, what they prize, but you really see, particularly by the third one, how all of this can become twisted. Knowledge is a good thing. The ability to affect change is a good thing. But you see what happens when someone who is twisted starts twisting that. And that last book, that Hideous Strength, the other time that Lewis tackles this topic is in a series of 3 letters called the Abolition lectures. The Abolition of Man, where he goes through these very similar ideas, and it comes from he's basically offering this warning that if we start trying to subjugate nature, there'll come a point when we will even cease to be human, because we'll only ever be seeking to master nature and then ultimately our own nature. And that has very dire consequences for humanity.
David, I have a follow-up question to your excellent point on how this is the Arthurian legend. So I find 2 points that are tricky in reading this space trilogy or Ransom trilogy.
Just 2?
One of which, just 2. Well, 2 of which I was thinking maybe we'll just stick with 2. Fair point. There might be more. One of them is, as an American, we don't grow up with the Arthur stories. Maybe we know the Sword and the Stone. I think we know that Guinevere and Lancelot had a thing.
A thing.
A thing, yes. Recently, I was reading like the Osborne Tales of King Arthur with my kids, and that's helping me get the overarching story of the Knights of the Round Table, King Arthur. Is there anything you would suggest for those of us who didn't have these Arthurian tales in the back of our minds growing up as children, or we were surprised that Merlin shows up on the scene at some point? Is there anything you would suggest to help folks, I don't know, understand King Arthur a little better?
I actually don't think there's anything too specific I would go for, because the myth of the thing, I would say, is the more important part. The image of a knight heading out into the unknown and battling monsters, and getting his battle scars and helping the weak, and then coming back changed, ready to rule and be king. That is, I would say, there are certainly more details into it, but unless you want to start going reading the Death of Arthur, I would say just having that image in your mind as you're going through and seeing how our protagonist changes over the course of the books is probably a good thing to track.
I like that.
Did you want to ask your second point?
What?
Your second sticking
Yeah,
point?
I can ask. Yes, the second sticking point, and I'll quote Lewis for this one, that I ran across this passage recently. But the second sticking point I at least found for myself at the very beginning, starting with Out of the Silent Planet, when they're in the rocket ship and they enter space, is the way Lewis describes space. Because we're moderns and we've watched Nova, and you start to read how Lewis describes space, and it doesn't jive with science. And so you start to say, what do you live under a rock? Like you start to look up the publication year, like how much do they know about space when he wrote this? So I had, if to give you time to think, I had a quote from Jason Baxter on this. Jason Baxter, I know he's fantastic, isn't he?
His book's just about to come out. I'm really excited. Why literature still matters.
I'm so excited for that one. I still need to read The Medieval Mind. So I'm reading Divine Comedy right now, and I was just reading A Beginner's Guide to Dante's Divine Comedy by Jason Baxter, in concert with my reading. And I ran across this passage just the other day, and I thought, oh, I have to throw this on the intro to the Space Trilogy, because this would have been helpful for me when picking up Out of the Silent Planet. So Baxter intros a quote, and then it'll be a quote from C.S. Lewis. Thus we can see that whereas we moderns tend to think of space as being a cavernous depth in which there are things billions of miles away, hidden away in the utter darkness of their chaotic landscape, medievals saw the universe as harmonious and comforting. As C.S. Lewis famously put it, nothing is more deeply impressed on the cosmic imaginings of a modern than the idea that the heavenly bodies move in a pitch black and dead cold vacuity. It was not so in the medieval model. You must conceive yourself looking up at a world lighted, warmed, and resonant with music. Pascal's terror at the eternal silence of that infinite emptiness never entered his, i.e., the medieval's, mind. He is like a man being conducted through an immense cathedral, not like one lost in a shoreless sea. And Baxter finishes saying, similarly, Dante, and we could just say Lewis in the Space Trilogy, describes his first entry into heaven, or the heavens, as entering into a world of warmth, light, and harmony. So I'm just going to throw that out there because I think understanding how the medievals would have thought about space would have helped me, since I think Lewis is following in that tradition rather than the more cold scientific thoughts of space.
Yeah. Ransom, he says, or he thinks this, as he's traveling through. He says, the very name space seemed a blasphemous libel for this empyrean ocean of radiance in which they swam. Older thinkers had been wiser when they named it simply the heavens that declare the glory. Yeah,
So good.
Lewis was a medievalist. That was the lens through which he saw things, and he saw the rampant progression of technology and science as not always necessarily a good thing, particularly when it disenchants our world. The quotation you read is perfect because imagine what it's like when you look up into the night sky and see lights everywhere and realizing the vastness and the beauty, and people, the scientists of the day are trying to figure out, what's up there. But it is a world that is enchanted. And unfortunately, along with development in science, there's this idea of everything just being dark and dead. And so one of the things that Lewis actually says in the end of the first book was that if we just at least get people to start calling space the heavens again, that we'd have made a good step. And it was all about re-enchanting and considering the models through which we view the world. Remember, I mentioned that perception is a very big theme throughout. Here is a case in point, because how we view the world will also very much help shape what we can and cannot see.
Is this a vote for calling it the Heavenly Trilogy then?
Oh.
Yes, people have said the Heavenly Trilogy or the Heavenly Cycle. I think the Ransom Trilogy is typically what I call it.
I like the Ransom Trilogy. Call me a curmudgeon, but I like it. Every time I read the Space Trilogy and the quote that you just read from Ransom, and knowing that Lewis wrote about it elsewhere, I'm like, I just don't love that it's called the Space Trilogy because I don't know that
Well, it's
Lewis
publishers'
liked
decision,
well, I
so
know
they
he didn't like
slapped it
that
on the
word.
cover of most of them. So I think we're kind of stuck with it. In the same way, HarperCollins re-released the Chronicles of Narnia in chronological order,
Yeah.
and you then just have to do the work of the Lord. And whenever you're around someone's house and you see the sets, you take them out, you put them in the correct order. Yeah, at friends' homes, in bookstores.
Fun.
I love when I see that when people have actually rearranged them. I have old ones, so they're arranged correctly, which is nice.
Me too. I actually still have. When I went back home, I
Hmm.
managed to find at least a couple of the ones that we had growing up, and they still have the
Oh.
proper numbering on them.
I found all of mine, or almost all of them. I think I bought 2 off of eBay, but I don't know that they're all first editions, but some of them are first edition or first American editions, maybe. But they're in the correct order, like nice hardback, cloth bound. And some of them even have like a little image on the cloth bound cover, like under the dust jacket. Very cute. But I got most of them for free when my parents' Baptist church library was closing. They were just like 5 out of the 7 were just sitting there. I was like, yeah, I feel a little bit bad about this, but not bad enough. And I'm just going to take these before anybody else sees them. I didn't even go there. I was just like visiting at college or something. Like, yeah, these are mine now. So they're, they sit on top of our piano. They're a proud possession. But yes, correct order. Now, I'm not necessarily recommending that you go and like Sharpie off a Space Trilogy on other people's Space Trilogy book. It's a little more permanent than like rearranging in a box.
I have been tempted to get little printed stickers 1 through 7 and just have them in my wallet at all times. So I can even leave them in the current order, but I'll stick the numbers over the top of the existing ones. But just to wrap up that thing about the heavens, if people are interested in this sort of thing, Dr. Michael Ward, he wrote a book called Planet Narnia and the Narnia Code that digs into this in a good deal of detail. But also Jason Baxter's book, The Medieval Mind of C.S. Lewis, really will help give people an understanding as to what Lewis thought had been lost and what he was trying to reclaim. He isn't in any great doubt as to the findings of modern science, and actually even in Out of the Silent Planet, because in the medieval conception of cosmos, the Earth is at the bottom. At this or at the center, depending on how you like to look at it. But you actually see in Out of the Silent Planet when the Ransom sees a depiction of the heavens of our solar system, it is scientifically accurate. But like I said, it was the power of the symbols that Lewis was really trying to recover here.
I've read part of Planet Narnia, but not the whole thing. And my intention is that, of course, I will read it while we're reading the Space Trilogy, but we'll see what happens. But have you read the Narnia Code? It's like a
It's a more
shorter
popular
version,
version. I would
essentially?
recommend most people go for the Narnia Code if they haven't read the
Do
Ransom
that.
Trilogy ahead of time, because he digs into that a
Okay.
good deal, as well as it's just more detailed, more
Okay.
scholarly. Narnia Code is really nice and readable, and it gives you a very clear conception of what Lewis was very likely doing with the Chronicles of Narnia, modeling each of the books after one of the planets of the heavens.
Okay. I wouldn't say it's even too hard, but it's just very, very detailed, the Planet Narnia.
It's dense.
So anyway, I might need to get a copy of the Narnia Code because that's more likely to get read in those 2 months. But okay, well, I think that's good unless you have anything else you want to add specifically on the Space Trilogy. I don't know, we might have covered this enough. But like, yeah, people that aren't sci-fi readers, will we like it? People that are sci-fi readers, are they going to be like really upset about it?
I would say everybody check your expectations at the door. If you like science fiction from the 1930s, you'll certainly recognize the style of this. I made the mistake of reading Out of the Silent Planet for the first time, expecting Star Wars. I did not get Star Wars, so I would
Very
say really
few
try and
lightsabers.
well,
Very few.
just a couple. Use the Force, Ransom. But yeah, I would actually say as a piece of general advice, everybody check your expectations at the door. This isn't going to be Narnia. This isn't going to be Star Wars or Star Trek. It is its own thing. It's well worth it, and very often there are some Lewis books that you can love all the way through. There are some that click at the end when you actually see what he's been doing and when you reflect upon it. These books, I would say, are definitely more of the latter kind.
Mm.
And I'd also say, in particular in Perelandra, you're going to get some of the best prose you will ever read ever. I think it really is Lewis at the top of his game. And lastly, just the advice I always give for Lewis, and I've heard it echoed on your previous episodes: read slowly, read in community, because it's always so much more entertaining, and you get so much more out of it when you're bouncing off other people as you're reading books like this. Because these are classics, and they've stood the test of time, and I'm sure they will for many, many years to come. But because of that, it's much better to read it with a group of friends.
I wish we were able to do spoilers because now I want to hear your favorite prose sections of Perelandra.
Oh, they're mostly at
Yeah.
the end, but
Okay.
I would also say the descriptions of
Mhm.
Perelandra are just
Yeah.
just gorgeous.
I want to go there. Yeah.
I can't wait. Can't wait. Oh, all right.
There was
Well,
actually an opera, by the way, of
Really?
Perelandra. Yes, and it was actually begun in Lewis's lifetime, and he'd heard
Was
some
it
of it.
good?
It's not bad. The recordings are kind of hard to come by, but I've managed to get it, and I'll probably play some of it on our podcast probably once we've finished reading, so people can get a sample of it. But yeah,
That's
it's pretty
neat.
good. I mean,
That's
it is
cool.
very operatic because it's like it's Paradise Lost. It very much fits in with all of those themes. So you can imagine a big fat lady singing at the front of a theater about Perelandra.
Was she? Well, I was gonna say,
Green, of
was she
course.
green? Big.
Oh, all right. We can skip this question if it's too much like your top five, but are there other Lewis books you would want to recommend to people if they're just getting into Lewis and they like this or don't, but want to read more Lewis? Where would you tell them to go next?
Pointing to my earlier comments about him and literary genres, it really is start in the kind of genre that you like. My personal opinion is The Great Divorce is his best work.
Yes.
I know some people say Till We Have Faces, and that's, what did I put that down? Number 5. I put that down as number 5. It's definitely his deepest, but I don't think it's his best. But yeah, the Great Divorce is another what if. So the Chronicles of Narnia is, what if the second person of the Trinity created a world of talking beasts and wanted to enter into it and redeem it? What would that look like? In The Great Divorce, it's, what if people in hell got the option of visiting heaven for the day and even staying there if they wanted to? How would that work out? And it's the book that I've read the most. I use it basically like a devotional because I feel convicted every single time I read
Yes.
it. And it's really, although the book is set in the afterlife, it's not about the afterlife. It is about the choices that we make, and how we turn ourselves into heavenly creatures or hellish creatures by those decisions, those compound decisions that build upon one another. And
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. Great Divorce is wonderful. In a similar vein, The Screwtape Letters. That's probably my number 2 Lewis book. It's like The Great Divorce, but funny. It's the satire in it is just superb. And for people that don't know, these are letters from a senior demon to a junior demon who's been tasked with trying to to tempt somebody towards hell. The Four Loves, if you like more philosophical thinking or thinking about the very nature of reality, The Four Loves is wonderful because it's a word that we use a lot, and particularly in English, it has a very wide semantic range. I love hot dogs. I love my wife. I love my children. I love the Packers. These are all very different kinds of loves. And Lewis basically gives us a framework to start thinking about those different kinds of loves, and in particular how those loves go wrong, because you find that theme throughout his works. You see people that have disordered loves, as Augustine would say. So they're loving a good thing, but they're loving it in a disordered way. They are putting it above other things that they shouldn't be putting it above. And so how can these loves go wrong, and what can we do to ensure they don't go wrong? And Mere Christianity, probably one of the best introductions to Christianity, hands down. And I mentioned Till We Have Faces before. That book is wild. It's so deep. It has so many layers in it. And I think pretty much everybody that reads it, they get to the end and then go, what the heck was that?
Well, that's great. I keep saying that I don't know if anybody's done this. I guess I should look if anyone's done this, but I haven't found it. I want to write an examination of conscience based on the Great Divorce, maybe the Screw Tape Letters too, because every time I
Yes.
read it,
Uh-huh.
I have to go to confession.
Yeah.
If I am reading it on a Saturday afternoon, I read a chapter and then off I go, whether I was
Done.
planning to or not.
Yeah. It's so true.
I
You
do
could probably
love
do
that.
it with other books too, but those specific are ones where I like
Mm.
can't pick them up unless I am ready to march my way a block to
Unless you
church.
have a free
Yeah.
3 to 4 p.m. time slot on your Saturday.
Yeah.
If you're booked, you can't
When I-
read The Great Divorce.
Mhm.
This must have happened like multiple Saturdays in a row where like, yeah, my husband was home, kids were napping, like I totally could go but was not planning to. And it just kept happening. I was like, I feel like I just went, but I need to go again, I think. Like,
Whenever I read the Screw Tape Letter where he says the thing about humans is that they have this weird opinion that 24 hours belongs to themselves,
oh,
and
Yeah.
that anything that anybody takes away from them is they're therefore stealing from them. I don't like that letter because yeah, that's me.
there any confession times
Yeah.
open this afternoon?
Yeah.
Oh, no, yes. As I think everybody can feel that, but I think especially parents can really, really
Mhm.
feel that. Yeah.
Yeah.
You interrupt my 2 to 4 nap time. That was my time.
Yeah. I'm
Oh,
not tired. Yes, you are. Daddy has things to do.
yeah.
Yeah.
When you like, yeah, hear some of the words come out of your mouth at that time. It's like, this is my time and you are
Mhm.
not sleeping. It's like, okay, I need to probably go pray or read Lewis.
Yeah. No, I was
Oh,
thinking that. I feel like, Jess, you mentioned a couple weeks ago the concept of like a dome piercing book, like a book that just
Mm.
so alters how you look at the world. And I feel like that was The Great Divorce for me
Mhm.
still to this day. I think, yeah, I like shudder to think about it. It's such a,
Mm.
yeah, also painful read, but
Mhm.
very.
That part at the end where he talks about heaven or hell working retroactively through your life. I mean,
It
Mm.
applies to so
yes,
much.
it applies to everything.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the idea that I often find that whenever you hear someone giving their testimony, that
Mm.
when they look back at even the worst moments, they see the hand of grace that was operating there
Mm.
because of what
Mm.
happens later.
Mm.
Can we say what's happening in the background of Hannah's life?
Yeah.
I was trying to cover it, but sure, go for it.
Who can
I'm so
describe
sorry.
this best? I mean, we're talking about sci-fi. There was a lightsaber
Yeah.
in the
I was
background.
gonna say, speaking, there was a
Yoda
Jedi
has
back there. Yeah.
entered, and then the other one's a pumpkin. They have apparently gotten into the Halloween costumes. I'm hoping it will keep them occupied for the next 20 minutes or however long we need.
This is my time.
I'm prepared for anything, guys. I don't have any idea what's going to walk up those stairs, but we'll see. We'll see. Sorry. Carry on. This is
That is when we're podcasting and something happens, sometimes I will be like, I will allow it.
yeah.
I will allow it. Like would never have allowed it otherwise, but I will allow it.
Yes. Anyway.
Oh, all right. And then you mentioned a couple other like sci-fi authors of the time. Are there any authors that write anything like a space trilogy that we should like look out for besides those, or is it just kind of its own thing?
For the first book, Wells is probably your best bet. But I don't know. I think that the Ransom Trilogy it's unique. There's nothing
Mm.
really quite like it.
I'm
I
here
like
for
it
that
too.
answer. All right. Well, are you ready to jump in and tell us your top 5 favorite books? No pressure at all. Not permanent.
I tried really hard not to think too hard about
Perfect.
this.
You have to just you can't.
I
We're
was just
joking.
writing down what are some books that I really like. I got to about 10, and then I thought, okay, I want to stop. I'm going to try and sort these a little bit.
Yeah. All right, go ahead.
So my number
Yes.
5 is Sense and
Ooh.
Sensibility. I know everybody
Ooh.
goes for some of the other ones, but Sense and Sensibility is my favorite. They're the characters that I like the most. I like the story the best. And I also think it's got one of the best adaptations in terms of movies out of the Jane Austen
Yes.
Which one?
set.
The Emma Thompson one? Okay.
Mhm.
Emma Thompson
Yeah.
and Kate Winslet. and
Oh, yeah.
Alan Rickman. Oh.
Yeah, no.
Can't beat
Yeah,
that
that's
cast.
No.
Now I want to go watch
I
it.
like that. I love Sense
So
and Sensibility, but I also have to say, as our first, like one of our first male guests, usually the women I'll say Pride and Prejudice. Maybe Mr. Darcy. It's I don't know. I feel like maybe that's a connection. But Sense and Sensibility is also it's great. Good choice.
well, Lewis was also a fan of Jane Austen. I think he indicates that Persuasion was his
Mhm.
favorite, and that's my wife's favorite, and it is
Yeah,
great.
good
But
one.
Sense and Sense. Actually, I began with Pride and Prejudice. I was actually in high school writing a book report on the new BBC adaptation that was coming out, and I hadn't read the book, and I fell in love with it and loved it, and then I read the book. But then I did the same thing with Sense and Sensibility, and it seemed to have all the things I enjoyed in Pride and Prejudice, but I don't know, polished a little bit more. I liked it.
Yes.
As
Who is your
Yeah.
favorite character in Sense? If that's even a good
Oh.
question in Sense and Sensibility.
Colonel Brandon frustrates me because I think he's too good for her.
I like to hear that. Oh,
It's
yes.
like, yeah. I think probably Eleanor, just because she has in a lot of Jane Austen's books, her heroines often have a very strong moral core, and Eleanor certainly has that, and she absolutely sticks to it even when it's ripping her heart out.
Mm.
It's true.
She knows what's
True.
right, and that's what she's going to do, and she's just going to deal with the horrible feelings that come with it when she's not getting what she wants.
Mm.
But it all ends happy, so that's good.
Yeah.
All right, good choice. We approve.
Okay. For my second one, number 4, Leaf by Niggle by J.R.R. Tolkien. It's actually my favorite. It's my favorite short work of his, just because one, when you know Tolkien's story, the fact that he labored for decades on the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion, and then this work sort of came to him in a dream and he knocked it out in a day or so. That's a miracle. So you need to read this just on based on that alone. But it's actually a wonderful companion piece to The Great Divorce, because it is about a purgation process, and it's also highly symbolic. Tolkien famously said that he hated allegory in all its forms. Well, Leaf by Niggle is an allegory, and I think it's one of the best things he ever wrote.
Oh,
Awesome.
I do love Leaf by Niggle. We did read that like years and years ago, and then we read The Great Divorce, and I think some people picked up Leaf by Niggle at the same time because yeah, they do go really well together. That's so good. And also,
Yeah,
yeah,
like a gin and tonic.
the fact that he worked so long on Lord of the Rings, and then the main character in Leaf by Niggle, well, Niggle, like works so long and has like one leaf. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, this was Tolkien's examination of conscience.
Yeah.
All right, my number 3. This was actually a book that was introduced to me by my wife. It's The Scarlet Pimpernel.
I love
Never
the
read
Scarlet
this.
Pimpernel.
She tried to read
Oh
me
my
it
goodness.
for years. Well, maybe not years. At least a year. She really wanted me to read it, and it was actually when we were visiting England, and we were in Bath in a quite famous little cafe called Sally Lunn's Buns, and she was reading it to me, and I fell asleep. Again, this was not the first time she'd read it to me. I don't know. Maybe I found her voice calming, but anyway, she tried to get me to read it, and I was a boy and annoying, and I didn't. And then when we moved to Wisconsin, she started her own book club here, and that was one of the books they were doing, and I decided to read it on the sly, and I absolutely loved it. I'd had people pitch it as kind of like a James Bond in the era of the French Revolution, and it is and it isn't. It's really actually a love story. It's a love story about a husband and a wife and how they miscommunicate with each other, which just puts the cherry on the top of my story as to my wife trying to get me to read this book. It is wonderful. It is fun, and you get to see some. You get to really fall in love with some characters, and and they spend most of the book miscommunicating, but fortunately, it all comes right in the end.
I gave that book to a friend to read who's a priest, but I think he was in seminary when I gave it to him. So I think he was really in a mindset where he was trying to understand people, and specifically as a man who was about to be a priest and having half of his congregation was going to be female. I think he was really trying to understand women. And after he read it, he was like, I liked it. But I thought, I mean, wasn't the girl a little stereotypical, a little flat? Like, that's not how women are, is it? I'm like, yeah, that is. He was like, oh, all right, good to know. Yeah, I absolutely love that book. I read it for a shout out to Mother of Divine Grace homeschooling. I was homeschooled through 8th grade, and that's on their curriculum in middle school
I've
time.
heard of it, but I've never
Yeah.
read it.
Such a
I'm-
fun
I feel
book.
like you guys are
Oh,
convincing
it's
me.
really fun.
Especially for kids, if you're doing the French Revolution and A Tale of Two Cities is a little too much to bite off, switch it out for the Scarlet Pimpernel.
Now, isn't where this will have already happened when this comes out, but in real time, we're about to interview Karen Ulo, she's a Catholic novelist who wrote a historical fiction
Yes.
book on the French Revolution too. So anyway, maybe I'll have to read this right
Mhm.
after. Definitely not before, because I need to get on that soon.
Yeah.
Well, my next recommendation, so number 2, is A Severe Mercy by Sheldon
so
Van
good.
Auken. When I was living
Kelsey's favorite.
when I was living in San Diego, this was known as the crying book
Yes.
because people would hand it to each other, typically women, and they would just like, "This is so sad."
I cried publicly in a coffee shop while reading this book. Yes.
Nate, my husband still laughs at me for embarrassing him he was at Duke Divinity School in the library. We were reading with his friends and I was like sobbing in the library reading this book. So it happens to the best of us.
Can confirm.
Yeah, it's a book that does tend to split people
Mhm.
because it's a story of romance and a story of conversion, and some people, I'm gonna say typically guys, aren't always warm to the romance part of it. I've read it a few times, but I will definitely say after being married, it takes on a very different sense because I really try to keep this list Lewis free, but he gets in there because in the Severe Mercy there's several Lewis letters because Sheldon and Lewis were friends, and also a very Lewisian theme about love because Sheldon Van Auken and his wife, they love each other deeply and they prize their own romantic love above everything. And then when his wife becomes a Christian, you know, there's a competition. There's another love that comes in, and everything has to start getting reordered. So I really like the romance part of it, and just the themes of reorienting your lives. And also, there's a wonderful moment when he's talking about his own conversion, and he's looking at the sort of the jump that he still has to make, and he sort of metaphorically looks back actually at where he was, and that jump to get back to where he was seems much further.
Yeah.
And I think that can sometimes be a very good image for people that are exploring faith and realizing that as they're going on the journey, they actually make much more progress than they think. And very often the final step is actually really just a step in comparison to all of the distance they've already walked.
Yeah.
I also think that besides just the actual like romance conversion story and Sheldon Van Auken's beautiful writing, he just is it's beautiful whenever I think as we haven't done our spring books yet, so maybe I shouldn't say it. Maybe I'll stop. It's not a spring book. Just getting into this. I've like read this in the spring so often. Just the way he describes everything just feels like this very like springtime book to read. But also I think it is kind of a good introduction into Lewis if you're not into Lewis already, because it introduces him as a person and a friend and a spiritual guide. And then they mention so many of his books that they're reading as well, but the letters are just so good. They make me love Lewis even more. Just seeing like what he'll say to his friends, and it's such a good book. I haven't read that in a while. I need to reread it.
Yeah. Yeah. Really good.
Well, before I give my number 1, I'm going to do some honorable mentions.
All right.
The list is written, so it's staying
yeah.
there. The first one is one I've heard you guys mention now. It's Anne of Green Gables. And once again, for its very Lewisian themes, it's all about Sehnsucht, joy, longing, and having a re-enchanted world. Man Alive by G.K. Chesterton, similar reasons, and also it's just really funny. This is a book that's hard to talk about without giving things away. I should say, I have shouted many things at my wife, the same thing as the protagonist has shouted at his wife in this book. I'm not going to say anything more than that. Another one was a recent, not quite discovery, but a recent adventure. I had not read any of the Harry Potter books. I saw the first movie when it came out, thought it was kind of boring and derivative, and just turned up my nose at it. And then I listened on the Literary Life podcast. They did like a 3-parter series on the Harry
Yes.
Potter.
So good.
I was like,
It was fantastic.
Might give this a go. I got them all done in the space of I think about 2 months. And my wife and I are now watching the movies, which, to be fair, they're not as good as the books.
They're not
Books
as
are
good
great.
as the books.
Um,
We're doing the
but-
same. Yeah, we just finished the first part of the 7th movie with all the kids because they had to read them, and well, they didn't have to read them. They had to read them before they could watch the movies. So I mean, listen to them.
Quite
But
right.
oh, we've had that Literary Life series. I think we've already shouted it out, but my daughter, who is obsessed now, and now like has listened to them, and now she reads them, and I think now she's rereading them. We're trying to convince her that there are other books out there. She's working on it, but she got for her birthday the class that the Literary Life people, the House of Humane Letters, are putting on for the second and third books. And so we've been watching / listening to that together. Very, very the series on the podcast for free was awesome. It made me want to reread them. The classes are honestly even better, and I'm not getting paid to say that. They did cost me money.
They may or may not be on my Christmas list to get bought on their annual sale at the beginning of next year.
They're worth it. You want it.
Oh, is it
Yeah, everybody
annual
put it on your
sale?
calendar.
Because it's on my list to buy those too.
Okay.
And I
Good
did
to
get the
know.
British versions after hearing them talk about that they were different.
Quite right.
And now I will only read those ones.
And you're gonna make Christmas jumpers just like Hannah did
Yes.
instead
Yeah.
of Christmas
Jumpers.
sweaters. We should have had David say that. Why did I say
Did you say
that?
jumper for us, please?
Yeah.
It
Jumper.
was better. Could we just edit that into just a sentence?
Christmas. Yes. Yes. The Weasley sweaters. Yeah. It's a new family.
My final honorable mention is a book you guys probably have never heard of, probably based on a show you've never heard of, Red Dwarf. Any takers? No. It's a sci-fi comedy that was in England as I was growing up, and there was an omnibus collection of the three books that came along with it. I bought it as soon as I found that it was on Audible as well, and it's hilarious and funny. It's basically about the last man alive going through space with a hologram of his dead bunkmate, a creature that was descended from the household cat, and a paranoid robot. So, well, maybe not so much paranoid, but he's kind of crazy.
This is the book I've been looking for.
It was just as I was drawing up the list, it's like that's in terms of number of times I've reread a book, that one's probably right up there.
Interesting. Okay.
But my number one, I couldn't get away from Lewis entirely. It's The Lord of the Rings for all the obvious reasons. It's wonderful. It's a world that you disappear into. Tolkien wrote so much about the verisimilitude, which is much easier to write about than say. And it is the world that you go into that just the rest of what people call life that just sort of fades away when I'm traveling with the Fellowship and entering Lothlorien and going through the Goblin tunnels. I don't think that one needs any more explanation other than it's an amazing book.
Yeah. Amen.
Oh, so good.
Yes.
So good. We just finished watching the movies recently, and while not as good as the books, if we're comparing them to like Harry Potter movies versus Harry Potter books, the Lord of the Rings movies versus the books, much better.
Yes.
Not better than the books, better than the Harry Potter movies.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which are also fun. I think both are fun. But we finished Lord of the Rings books or movies, and I'm like sobbing at the last scene. I'm like, I didn't know I was that into this, but I am.
We just
good.
finished reading The Hobbit last month with my 5 and 3-year-old, and they really wanted to watch a movie, and we were like not going to show them the whatever,
Those aren't
that
that
was
good.
that came out a few years ago. But so we found the 1977 animated. It's hilarious, the animation. It's so like 70s, the music and stuff. It's hilarious. But now it's like my kids are so obsessed. Every person they see, they're like, "Can I talk to you about The Hobbit?" Like that's the new thing. And now they don't want to read any books that don't have goblins. So
Hmm.
we're working on that was the
The
thing. They loved
George MacDonald
Narnia.
mix, then.
Yeah, I was gonna
I was
say
gonna
George
say, are you doing the
MacDonald.
Princess and the Goblin?
Well, that's that we read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. We've just read that one. And my oldest is like very sensitive, and I was so worried when we were getting to the death of Aslan. I was like, oh my gosh, he's gonna be so sad. So I'm trying to prepare him. And I'm like, we're doing the audiobook in the car. So I'm kind of like looking in the rearview mirror. I'm like, is he okay? Is he okay? I'm like, Charlie, are you okay? Like, I know that was really sad. And he's like, yeah, that was so sad. Are those witches and goblins gonna come back though? Like he just likes bad guys right now. So we're working on that, but only books with
praying for him.
monsters. We're praying for him.
Wow.
This child is my godchild,
That's
so I
true.
really am
So
praying
you
for
really
him.
yeah.
Not specifically for that, but
He's also
it's in there.
his other problem is he's fascinated by the underworld. This is the thing he asks about. Does he have to go to heaven or can he go to the underworld? We got a lot of work to do. It's okay. He just likes bad guys, you know? It's something there.
Just like write all this down for the therapist later. Just take some notes. Oh, well, before we hop off, can you just tell us you're a dad, you have another job, you have a podcast. When do you read? How do you read? Give us advice.
Well, in the mornings, I primarily read Hafty the Hamster, and in the evenings, chiefly Curious George.
Oh,
So
Love it.
yeah, that's pretty much most of my reading with actual books. Even as I'm reading Curious George in the evenings, I'm usually falling asleep. So the actual opening of real live books and reading is very rare, but I do listen to a lot of audiobooks because that I can do while I'm tidying up, while I'm driving. I can actually even do that in the evenings and mostly not fall asleep, although there is a sleep timer just in case. Because on more than one occasions, I have woken up in the morning to discover that I've quote unquote read one of my Audible books. It's like I remember chapter 1, maybe. But yeah, that's pretty much how I survive. On audiobooks, on very rare occasions, I actually get to sit down quietly with a book. Or thankfully, because my son's now 3, he's starting to get into good books, like books about superheroes, and he's not quite ready for Narnia yet. And I'm really working very hard not to just read them to them now.
yeah.
Although what we often do is I'll read him a book and then we turn out the light and I'll stay with him for like 5 minutes, and he'll say, "Daddy, can you tell me a story?" Because he loves stories in the dark. I have actually told him the story of The Hobbit in
That's good.
episodes. So
That's
over the
awesome.
course of,
That's
I think
awesome.
it took me about 2 weeks. I just told him what happened, and so he has kind of read
That's
Tolkien.
awesome. Hey, yeah. I like
That's
that.
awesome. I like that. Oh, that's fun. All right. Well, where can we find you on the internet? You're at Pints with Jack. Do you guys have anything exciting coming up, going on?
Well, Pints with Jack is on most social media platforms, including MySpace. We are bringing it back.
MySpace. Wow.
Yeah. And the hub for everything is pintswithjack.com, which is our website. And as for special projects, it will have already passed by the time this comes out. But at the end of November, we have C.S. Lewis Reading Day on November 29th. This is mimicking Tolkien Reading Day, when people are encouraged to share quotations of, in this case, Lewis, with their friends on the internet. We've got a big library of nice, pretty quotation graphics for people to share. And there'll be groups getting together to do things, and there'll be special YouTube episodes and blog posts, and we'll be having several live streams that day. So they will still be available after the fact. So if you want to come and watch us talk about C.S. Lewis and friendship, which is the theme for this year, go to pintswithjack.com and you'll find the links.
That sounds fun. That sounds fun. That's great. Oh,
Why should
well,
the
thanks
Tolkien
for coming
nerds have all the excitement? That's what I thought.
on.
True.
I love it. Oh, well, thanks for coming on. I hope everybody's excited to read the Space Trilogy. I was already excited, but I'm more excited now. So
Totally.
thanks. Thanks, David.
So much, David.
You're very welcome.
Thanks for listening. If you would like to read alongside us, our books for this year are Walking on Water by Madeline L'Engle, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, J. Bear Crow by Wendell Berry, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, Othello by William Shakespeare, Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, and That Hideous Strength, all by C.S. Lewis, The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, Death Comes for the Archbishop by Willa Cather, Trust by Hernan Diaz, Everything Sad is Untrue by Daniel Nayeri, and Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen.
That's all we have for now. Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to subscribe to the Reading Revisited Substack to stay up to date with the latest book chat, see what we're reading next, or even make a small contribution if you want to support what we're doing. Until then, keep revisiting the good books that can enrich your life and nourish your soul.